David Mamet often writes about writing, and one of his missives, which no doubt has been often missed, is the story of his cup of coffee. Cup of coffee on his writing desk right next to his manual Corolla typewriter. At least when he wrote this, he would click, click, clack, clack his way to the Pulitzer with two fingers. And as he typed, the carriage would keep moving to the right, and it would bump into his cup of coffee and either spill coffee or knock the whole thing over. And then he would slam the carriage back, and then he would clean up the mess, refill the cup of coffee, put the cup of coffee back down, and then click, click, clack his way to the carriage moving all the way to the right again and summarily bumping into his cup of coffee, rinse and repeat. I've always loved this story simply because it's so human. You have someone of his commanding reputation, and he keeps spilling his cup of coffee like a moron. And as a writer, you can't help but relate to the raw humanity of it, but also feeling somewhat like a moron. The art and craft of writing is immersive, but it's also so routine and everyday if you take this stuff seriously, if you really are a writer. And little habits like this are not only hard to break, but a part of the ritual of writing itself. And an essence of that, I'm convinced, for folks really into this madness, is the absent-mindedness and just the existential Sisyphus-like quality of click, click, clack, clack, line after line, carriage return, spilled coffee, fill the coffee, sip the coffee, go take a leak, come back, click, click, clack, clack. I can relate. And with that spirit, that mixture of ethereal, creative bliss, that meditative state of immersion, coupled with the silly stupidity of making the same mistakes over and over again, I reminisce about a very creative 2025. Hello and welcome to Bald and Bloviating. I'm your still very bald host, Mookie Spitz. I continue to bloviate this first day of 2026, and I want to share my adventure in branching out and away from that typewriter, as it were. Of course, I use a personal computer and a word processor. I post on websites, Medium. I've got 440 something blog posts. I write with Microsoft Word or Google Docs. And it's a digital kind of writing life, but it's still click, click, clack, clack. I use all my fingers, not just two. I can type blind in about 90 words a minute. I have remarked to people who might or might not care that if I wouldn't be a decent typist and I had to write all this by hand like Dostoevsky in a cold Russian basement, I never would be a writer. I don't think so. I can't even read my own writing. There's something soothing about the act of typing, the physicality of actually typing. I can actually say I actually enjoy. And this idea that I type blind, that the execution of the writing itself is unconscious, it's integrated. It's like a musician plucking the strings on a fretboard. You don't think about where you put your fingers for a D chord. You just make the D chord, and after a while, you don't even think about the D chord. It just becomes an element of your creative process, one of many, Typing is like that for me. And I've been similarly comfortable in this zone of air quote, just being a writer. And what I found since branching out of that motif is people are in their creative comfort zones, and it often translates to a modality. My comfortable modality was blogs, essays, screenplays, plays, entire novels. I was a writer. And I had often thought about the tools and technologies of social media, of video, of imagery, and of audio. I had already been listening to podcasts. I listened to the news. A big chunk of my input throughout the day, whether it is just world information, business news, conversations, punditry, a big chunk of this has shifted over the years from exclusively written content that I read, I sit and read, to background information that I ingest while doing other things. I was a jogger, runner in New York City for years. I ran all the half marathons in all of New York's boroughs multiple times over multiple years. Staten Island, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens. I ran all of them. And then I did the full New York Marathon. And I exercised daily, often daily at the gym for an hour or more. I was a fit mofo. I'm still okay, but I think I was at my height, my adult life, while living in New York City. And none of this would have really been possible without good headphones and smart people talking about things that interested me in the background. I'm also a fan of electronic dance music, the EDM stuff, the rave music. A little bit antiquated to what young people I think today are listening to. I'm into the Armin van Buurens of the 2000s, 2010s. But anyway, I like the rhythmic, mesmerizing, meditative quality of what one friend remarked as Excel spreadsheet music. There's a mathematical regularity and layering to that stuff. And I also like Scandinavian black metal, which is its own separate story, which got me out of my classic rock rut, where people just listened to what they grew up with, and I was sick of it. And I had a good friend who turned me on to this crazy music that just exploded in my brain one day. But all that aside, my point here is that for years, I've been augmenting my entire life in a very, very pleasurable way with audio, headphones, music, but mostly podcasts, people talking, interviews, news on a daily basis. Some very topical, others more long form, like Carlin's history podcast is just wonderful. He's got 4, 5, 6 hour segments on historical movements and epics. And I would eat this stuff up in installments while doing other things. So, long story even longer, I've been a multimedia guy for years, but I never put myself in the shoes of the creator. I was a writer, I was a marketer, I was an agency guy. And I had whiffs of grabbing a camera and being a creator in social media, but I never really cared. I just wanted to consume, not necessarily create, because I think, maybe to a certain extent as an excuse, I was a writer. I wasn't a video blogger, an influencer, a podcaster. Those were other people, and I consumed their content. And this this boundary that existed between me as a certain type of creator and the obvious transformation going around me lasted for arguably longer than it should. During the pandemic, I ran through an abandoned New York City. And there were many, many moments where I thought about posting beyond just my Facebook friends and Instagram pals, but going on Twitter, which was Twitter at the time, and just sharing with the world video and imagery of an abandoned New York, and then maybe putting together a color commentary on the side because I was very verbose just with my own little circle about the pandemic, everything about it, the self-delusion plaguing both sides of the political aisle. Everything that was going on was so amazing, so once a century in every kind of way. And again, I had moments where I could share my experience in real time with the world with the tools at my disposal, and yet I chose anonymity. I chose to experience it without this added layer of being a creator, being a chronicler, beyond, again, just my own little circle. And in retrospect, I'm not sure why. All I can say is that it just felt right to me at the time. And maybe another way of looking at it is that I wasn't yet ready. My time hadn't come for doing it. Part of it might have to do, and again, this could be another excuse, but I'm just being honest. It didn't feel right, and it didn't feel right also because I was the dad. I had my two sons that I was taking care of in my Lower East Side Manhattan apartment. And I had a job to do. I had hours to fill so I could feed them and take care of them. My older one was set for college and the usual responsibilities that puts on an American parent. And the younger one was going through emotional crises, and it was challenging on all these different levels. Again, the single parent kind of ethos. No regrets and no feeling that I was making huge sacrifices for just doing what I felt was what I had to do. Take care of them, focus on them. It wasn't so much about me, it was about them. Fast forward a few years, just last year, year and a half ago, I moved from New York. Expensive, dirty, noisy, a real pain in the ass. I loved New York until I hated it. But that said, I moved to Orange County, California to continue on my creative trajectory, which actually got triggered while I was in New York with a partnership with an illustrator friend of mine to write the novel adaptation of a screenplay that we had written back in 2008, 2009. Super Santa. And I have podcasted and blogged about this too. It's on Amazon if you want to check it out. Broke the big book into 3 books. It's got its own adventure associated with it. But I moved out of New York because I wanted to, because my older son had joined the Marines and he was no longer living with me. And my younger son was at the cusp between high school and college and was thinking about taking a gap year. And my mind was exploding with this opportunity to write more books because Super Santa had taught me how to write a whole novel. And I chose Orange County, California to be near the illustrator partner of this book. And I did that. So back end of July of 2024, is that right? I moved 18 months ago. And my partner seemed to bug out, which is its own story. And I found myself in the suburbs of Orange County pretty much as a solo creator. I came with the notion that me and my partner would be cranking out books, old school books, illustrated books, novels, illustrated novels. We would continue the Super Santa saga into many sequels, which we had already mapped out. I couldn't wait to leap in and turn it into a lifestyle. We even talked about opening up or at least renting an office space where we can go in and work every day, and that was just not to be. So there I was with as much enthusiasm as when I arrived, having to rethink my creative self. This was in September of 2024. And as I was doing that, and as I was working on the second edition of this Super Santa book, breaking the big book into 3 books and just polishing up the prose, I added something like 20,000 words to the book. I came out of that experience and this experience of losing this partnership with that realization that I was on my own again. And then I coincidentally ran into a local guru. Really. Now, this guy has his own story. And just for the sake of simplicity here, our paths crossed and he wanted to build his following. He had his disciples from all over the world. And again, this is really, it's very much a Southern California kind of thing. It's a worldwide kind of thing, but the arrangement here was unique to the environs out here. He had a house or has a house nearby, and he's got a personal assistant, and he lives with his daughter, and he's got his minions. But his minions have been in the 40, 50 range of people from throughout the world. And he knew that he had to kind of build his flock. So when our paths crossed, I had just started making videos and posting on TikTok. And one of these videos was just a message I did for a client of mine addressing issues in the Middle East. So I do a TikTok experiment around this time for a client. And again, we're talking September-ish 2024. And this thing goes viral. I'm in my kitchen. I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't even know how to properly caption this video. I post it on TikTok and it immediately goes viral. I had never seen these types of numbers before. Within an hour of posting, I had something like 10,000 views. I couldn't believe it. And it kept ratcheting up. Day after day after posting this video, I had 20,000 people look, then an additional 30,000. And this coalesced with my interaction with this guru, this spiritualist in the neighborhood, so to speak. So I remember some of our brainstorming meetings, I brought over not only my notes for re-engineering the design and architecture of his website and doing some content strategy with all of his guru stuff and organizing his content into lesson plans and a kind of pedagogical hierarchy or journey, and suggesting that he start podcasting and branching out to create basically a foundation of thought leadership in the digital world. I had my phone and I would go, hey, look at this. Look at the power of social media. And we would start the meeting at 2:30 in the afternoon and end at about 3:30 in the afternoon. And I wrote down how many views and comments this video had. And the delta from the start of this meeting to its finish in an hour, in that moment, it increased something like 17,000 views. It was incredible. From my experience as a blogger, where I go up on Medium and I post a blog and maybe 30 people read it over the course of months, my bald head popped up on tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands of phones. And it coalesced with this guru and what I was proposing to do for him, to get him to be multimedia and digital. He had a presence on YouTube and he was on Instagram, but it's frankly like 2005 kind of stuff with catchy memes, and the videos were too long. And again, the opportunity for optimizing his stuff was broad. And I had the know-how, at least the basic know-how, to get him up to speed. The point, though, in all of this is interesting because in my role as this personal mentor, digital mentor to this local Orange County guru, a realization struck me that A, I should practice what I preach. B, I haven't recently checked out the latest when it comes to podcasting. I just started with TikTok and this video thing, and this thing blew up. And there's so much that I can do in terms of video editing and social media exploration and evaluating apps and technologies for facilitating all this stuff, that the light bulb went off. Why am I sitting there on Medium writing blogs that 30 people read? Why am I soured to this idea of creative partnerships when my creative partner bugs out on me after I moved across country to be a mile from the guy? Why am I all introspective and wondering what's next when there's a universe of possibility that's sitting there looking at me? It's not only sitting there looking at me, but it's shouting at me at the top of its lungs, like, what the hell have you been doing? And at this point, again, my older son was independent. He's in the Marines. He got through boot camp. My younger son, he got a job. He got another job. He was becoming financially independent. He's scouted out his own career path as a pilot. So since then, he's been going to pilot school and studying like I've never seen him study before. So once again, Daddy-O, who was all worried about supporting his family as a single parent, Daddy-O was no longer Daddy-O. He was a progressively aging dude who always had the aspirations to create content, always saw himself as a writer, was actually doing the writing like never before, often as a detriment to his own business, placing writing above all else, feeling less responsible and able to kind of wing it, but operating in this claustrophobic and fairly idiotic void of not taking advantage of the tools, technologies, channels, platforms, modalities of communication that were being adopted by millions of other people. So there you have this leap, this quantum leap that happened toward the end of 2024, which was an experiment, went viral on TikTok with the first person video. I became associated with this guru who wanted to grow his minions, and I had an opportunity to be his digital marketing consultant. And that begged the question of my own digital marketing literacy in 2024. And then I did some research, and then I dived in. And as 2024 rolled into 2025, two things happened. The one, the guru and I apparently did not jibe. So I presented him with a slew of proposals and ideas and plans, and he didn't go for it. So what looked like a potential opportunity didn't hit the ground. But what I was left with was this hunger for branching out myself. And whether you believe in these spiritual essences or not, and you could even look at it as sympathetic magic, there was some mojo there, because even though he didn't like me and he didn't hire me, there's a halo effect associated with this guy, which is he gave me a gift. And the gift was self-realization and actualization. And that's what this guy's shtick was ultimately all about. So the universe works in mysterious ways. Again, whether you believe in any kind of divine plan or even just the forces of statistical or anonymous karma and dharma. But that mojo rubbed off, and I hit the ground running, not as the guru's marketing digitalista, but my own. And when January rolled into February of last year, I got into podcasting, and I continued on TikTok, and I cranked up my Substack, and I started on Patreon, which is that artist's platform for people perhaps throwing some money at you to keep doing what you're doing. So every channel that was available and seemed viable, I got into. I learned, I explored, I started posting on. My video rants continued daily, and my TikTok following grew. I had a few other viral videos. Interestingly enough, that one of that early ones that I described with the guru was the one that exploded the most early on. I've had a few other successes, but since then, in a year, I went from almost 0 followers to 15,600-ish. I've got 250,000 likes and tens of thousands of comments. Not all nice. You get a lot of abuse online, and I've learned a lot, and I have bloviated about it on this show, Bald and Bloviating, and the others. But suffice to say that TikTok took off in its own way. Probably 1,000 videos, 1,000 this year on TikTok. And then I shared them again on Instagram, YouTube, my Mookie Multiverse channel on YouTube. Everything is there, including my podcast. Substack, also Mookie Multiverse. And Patreon, as I mentioned, Mookie Spitz. So I started cranking, and I started adopting a full multi-channel approach from this weird evolution and synergy. And as far as the podcasts went, I did two things. The first, I had to figure out how to record them and what kind of editing software to use. And after I did the research, and no, I'm not a paid sponsor here, I decided on the Riverside app, which is what I'm using now. What's cool about this app is the sound quality is decent if you get the mic chosen properly. And like David Mamet with his coffee mug and typewriter, I redid my laptop setup here, and I got one of those hubs for plugging everything in and making sure everything was right. And the last couple podcasts I did, I had the wrong mic setting, so it's all a mess. I keep knocking the coffee cup over. But to suffice to say, if you got your setup right, Riverside is good, and it actually offers you an opportunity to edit from the transcript of the audio and video. So it does video, it does audio only if you want it, and then it transcribes the words in the podcast into an editable transcript. And when you delete words in the transcript, it automatically splices the audio and video. It's great. I'm sure there are other programs that do this, but I did research, and this seemed to be the most efficient, easiest to use, and affordable one. I pay a monthly subscription. So here I am. And then the next step was, well, how do I get it out there? Now, there's all these streaming platforms. You've got Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Outcast. The list goes on. And it could be a huge pain. It's a huge pain, as I just mentioned, to take my video, my rant videos, my daily ranting from my kitchen and my patio, and sometimes walking around the neighborhood talking about politics and art and culture in 1 to 3 minutes and reposting them on all these other video platforms. So that's time consuming. And frankly, I need to figure out a better way to do that. And that's probably long overdue too. Once again, I'm knocking over that coffee mug over and over again. Anyway, I had to figure out a way to optimize that, so I chose the app Buzzsprout. And Buzzsprout is a single upload that then automatically distributes the podcast, just the audio podcast, to every platform that you can think of and everyone that's no doubt relevant instantly. It all goes up there. It instantly uploads, and within an hour or two, it gets blasted everywhere. And then I get a metrics. So it tells me how many people watch or listen, and more or less where they are. I get a location and a number of people who check it out, which is pretty cool. Buzzsprout is kind of expensive for what it is. You get an allotment of hours. But between Riverside and Buzzsprout, I have been cranking podcasts. That's my technological setup. Now, here's how I thought about this. And this is kind of interesting, and I've bloviated about this recently too. I had two angles to take on, or two decisions. The one was two options that I had to decide on. The one was, do I do a single podcast, just call it the Mookie Spitz Show, or the Mookie Multiverse, as I've landed on for my brand across all these channels, and just blast everyone from that one show? I mean, Joe Rogan does this. Mark Maron does this. Joe Rogan's even more fragmented and nobody seems to care. He does mixed martial arts reffing. He's got mixed martial artists on. And then he interviews everyone under the sun, from Donald Trump to Sir Roger Penrose, the physicist. And there's no breakdown in his brand. It's the Joe Rogan Show, right? And you could have a Nobel Prize winner or a stand-up comic a day apart and no one's mind is blown and no branding violations occur. But that's Joe Rogan. He's one of the pioneers, and he's got something like 60 million downloads per show, and I'm Mookie Spitz, and frankly still pretty much flying under the radar. So I opted not to do that. And instead, I thought it'd be more effective is if I picked particular subjects, gave it their own name, and launched separate shows with host Mookie Spitz. And here's the three shows that I opted on from the beginning. The first one that came to mind was a business show. Bald Ambition was the name I finally chose. Get it? Not blonde ambition, bald ambition. Ha ha ha. And the initial vision was to have a class in consultative selling, which to me is the art of good marketing. So the classic counterpoint is the used car salesman. You go into a lot and they say, hey, how you doing? You shake hands, you fist pump. He takes you to a car and he starts pointing out features. Look, it's got leather bucket seats and AM, FM radio and a 350 Hemi. You want to take it for a ride, baby? Well, he's not asking you a single question. He doesn't know why you're there, what you want. And he's not really making a connection with you. He's just barfing out the features and maybe the advantages of this product or service. And that's the opposite of what's done with a consultative sell, which you don't even talk about the product or service. You spend quality time getting to know your client. And in that conversation, you build up their needs. Lots of times, clients don't even know what they want. It's like Henry Ford said, if you ask people what they want, they're going to tell you they want a faster horse. They don't even know a car exists. So how are you going to get them to buy a car? Well, you could show them a car and tell them it's got bucket seats, AM, FM radio, and a 350 Hemi. But if they don't even know what they want or don't even understand their own pain, which your solution is meant to solve, then you're not really getting anywhere. So I thought of putting together a class in consultative selling, and this is a whole separate category of digital content that was really the rage probably 5-10 years ago. Everyone started a class. And I had an opportunity to start a class too, but again, for a lot of the same reasons I didn't do any of the other creator stuff, I didn't do that. So I thought of a crossover, a podcast kind of class. And the first episode of Bald Ambition was a bit of a setup for that. It's the art and science of consultative selling, February 5th of last year. It was an intro to the series, only 5 minutes long. And it kind of set it up as this is going to be the Bald Ambition podcast where I'm going to more or less focus on this stuff. But one thing led to another, and I came to the quick realization that A, it's going to bore me pretty quick, that B, a podcast isn't a place to have a class. If I want to do an online class, do an online class. And C, it's way more fun to just talk to people. So that's the angle I took. And only a couple of days later, I managed to convince my former life partner, who's the CEO of a casting company in New York, to come on and talk about her brunette ambition, which is casting real people in the age of AI. And then I was off to the races with this thing. I was having so much fun. I did audio only because I really couldn't quite figure out the video yet, and I was just taking it one step at a time. And from there, I went and reached out to all the people that I knew who might be willing to do a podcast with me. So this included current and former clients, people that I was working with and had worked with in the past, people that were friends of mine on Facebook and sometimes crossed generational barriers. So I interviewed a Zoomer female, a millennial male, the former chief creative officer who started a company making spice, another entrepreneur, former colleague who started a company in recruiting and hiring, a trainer guru. The list goes on and on for people who I knew personally, who were part of my network, who would be willing to jump on the podcast. And all told, from early February to the latest one that I did just a few days ago, who's a good friend of mine and former colleague who does the Tino reviews. He is a product reviewer on TikTok, evolving in parallel to a large extent, just like I have capped the year 55 episodes into it. So on average, I did one episode of Bald Ambition every week for 2025, covering all of these bases, even overlapping with some of my creative ventures, where I brought on Ingrid Moon, who is a fellow science fiction writer, and we went to LA Comic-Con and had a really fun experience there, and I wanted to share our experience selling books as an indie author. Now, during the trajectory of this thing, I actually got outreach from PR agencies. And this is to a certain extent thanks to AI. I would get these very generic emails addressed to me, and it would clearly be written by a bot. So, for example, so and such, listen to your Bald Ambition podcast, and such was intrigued by X, Y, and Z, and we feel that they would be a great match because they do A, B, and C. Now, clearly this was on the brink of being spam email, and there were a few shady looking ones, but I connected with a few of these PR companies, and I branched out from just people I know and have worked with to folks who have their own companies and want promotion through podcasting. And this included Mike Gatto, who was a former representative of here in the House of Representatives from California, was thinking about reigniting his political career. I've had entrepreneurs who founded interesting companies in vibe trading, in redefining insurance, in running sole proprietorships, a pharma AI engagement company, another PR company. So if you scan the list of episodes in Bald Ambition over the course of a year, it's kind of like I set up shop and I started at the corner burrito cart, and I went to the houses of all my friends and family to sell them. And then I opened up my own little stand, and pretty much its own standalone restaurant here by sheer momentum. Throughout all of this, I haven't paid for advertising. It's been all organic. And the engagement's been not bad when you look at the overall stats in terms of overall downloads and listens. You know, some of our episodes are at multiple hundreds of listens. Some are what I call the friends and family listen. And all told, many thousands of downloads for Bald Ambition over the course of the last year. Not bad. Pretty fun. And I'm going to continue Bald Ambition into 2026 and see where it takes me. One of my goals, if you will, or resolutions, is to expand reach, perhaps exploring paid advertising. So for the most part, I'm invisible to the algorithms. So I haven't built up enough critical mass in and of themselves to be noticed. And these platforms are deliberately designed to get some of your money. You really need to pay to play is one of the outputs, one of the insights that I've learned this year. And I think I'm going to throw some money at this too. In ways it's kind of obvious, and in ways it's a coffee mug spilling and dropping stupidity that I've just insisted on earned media and expected it to grow faster than it has. But I really wanted to see what kind of merit just organically my content would have with the algorithms as they exist right now. And the answer is, have I reached critical mass so that I could pay the rent and monetize with my podcast? And the answer is absolutely not. And then the question becomes, how much longer do you need to keep pumping content to make it happen? The answer is, I don't know. But the other observation is, sooner or later, I'm going to die. So again, I think I'm going to explore paid advertising regarding content in 2026. I think another way to look at this, and I thought of this phrase the other day, and it's kind of fun. It's the Amazon flywheel versus a blizzard of bullshit. And that's a fun way of looking at it. Let me describe it as succinctly as I can. The Amazon flywheel is a principle that Bezos and company have had for many years, which is you might lose money on individual items, and actually you might lose money on whole business divisions. So, as is already well documented and known, Bezos wrote an iconic letter to shareholders in the late 90s, basically saying, don't expect returns for at least 5 years, maybe 10. We're going to continue to lose money until we take it over the top. And an extension of that is, as I'm mentioning, certain business divisions could really be just lost leaders. kind of like the calzones at Costco or the little pastries that you get. You can buy a whole bunch, like a dozen of them for $5.99. And you know that they're at cost, if not actually losing money on this item. But they're to lure customers in, because if you can convince a customer to go to Costco instead of Ralph's, then you might lose a few bucks on the calzones or croissants or whatever it is you're selling. But if you could just get the ass in the door, then they're going to wind up spending $300-400, which is inevitable the second you walk into a Costco, and you're going to more than make up for it. And the Amazon flywheel extrapolates on that, which is you just keep the flywheel spinning, and based on the centripetal force and the raw momentum, it takes on a life of its own. And once it's spinning fast, you don't need to add too much energy. It's built up momentum. It's reached a state of critical mass, and it could just keep hauling ass. So the principle of the Amazon flywheel kept the momentum going. Amazon Prime is notorious for losing money, like into the tune of billions of dollars. And it's not surprising even if you're paying $100, $125 a year for your Prime membership, that's nothing compared to how much the company loses on a lot of the deliveries, especially like the overnight deliveries. Whether you're ordering like a roll of toilet paper or a pencil, right? They got to ship that stuff. And just the supply chain necessary to get all that stuff out there to millions of customers, millions of items, it's going to be a loss leader. And parallel to the evolution of Amazon as this everything store, starting in books and then delivering everything you can imagine, Bezos and company realized that it's all about the data, that the inventory control and the shipping control and the buying and the selling, that took up a lot of data and a lot of data processing. It became a computer computational exercise. And they built up an enormous infrastructure to handle this. And then they were like, well, let's sell this stuff. And AWS, Amazon Web Services, started even ahead of the curve of Microsoft. And a lot of folks now would dominate in web services. AWS was the granddaddy of this, which came out of just, it was like a second thought that came out of just having to deliver shit to people. So what am I getting at here? The Amazon flywheel is just keep pumping it out. You might lose money on an individual item or an entire business unit, but the sheer action of creation and distribution has a life of its own. And as long as you've got the volume, you're not only going to stay afloat, but you'll eventually take it over the top. This is the opposite attitude of Trump and his tariffs, by the way. To me, the dumbest aspects of Trump's stupid tariffs is this undercutting of this flywheel concept. He keeps insisting that all these countries are ripping us off, but come on. It's like we're going to tariff Bangladesh so they don't make t-shirts? Is this going to what? Hire a couple hundred people in a Louisiana factory? Is that the future of the United States of America? And I don't mean to sideline here into politics, or economics. And yes, we do need tariffs and we need controls on vital infrastructure in case we do get into a war or we are isolated for some reason. We need to be self-sufficient. So whether it's, precious minerals, right? Scarce minerals, or masks for a pandemic, or computer chips, yes, we need to be self-sufficient. Yes. Selective tariffs work. But the power of the flywheel alone makes global commerce the thing you want to do and indulge in. Okay, I digress, but that's the flywheel. Now, what's a blizzard of bullshit? Well, a blizzard of bullshit is quantity with maybe questionable quality. And even if you've got quantity and quality and just a ton of it, in and of itself, for its own sake, might not do anything at all for you when the supply is just so ginormous and the connectivity between the supplier and those who demand it, namely the consumer, is opaque or sketchy. And that is our digital reality right now. So what the F does this have to do with me podcasting like a maniac? Well, what it has to do with is I am cranking this stuff. I'm adopting the Amazon Flywheel approach to just cranking out as much content as I can. But it's turning into a blizzard of bullshit because it's not really sticking. I don't have exponential growth. I have just this kind of arithmetic kind of plodding along. And the reason for that, I think, is because the platforms are designed to make money. And unless I can create my own groundswell based on the content and its stickiness itself, my content won't even be seen a little. And if it's not seen a little, it remains hidden, then it's a negative feedback loop. I won't be able to branch out, and then the algorithms won't favor me. So the cat chasing its tail. In order to be seen, you need to be seen. In order to be popular and gain popularity, you need to be popular to the point where people see you, and then the word gets out. So I have taken, by my own admission, an Amazon Flywheel approach with the result of a blizzard of bullshit. And I am looking to 2026 in a few ways, which I'll talk about in a second too, to not only explore paid advertising in a way, hopefully, that can get me more qualified traffic than not. Sure, I could get maybe 1,000 views on a podcast, and this has already happened. But if the content itself doesn't stick and there isn't natural appeal to a given audience, then what's the point? But even bigger than that is, when does a blizzard of bullshit turn into a real flywheel within this kind of environment? And how can I push that along without being too deliberative with it? It's like, I love creating content for content's sake. I don't want this to turn into its own day job. But as my buddy Tino said from Tino Reviews on the last podcast I did for this show, it's got to be work. You got to work it. Can't just show up and go, woo, I'm going to have a good time, because you might and likely won't get results, which can ultimately heighten the ROI to the point where it's not just something that you love to do, but it can actually help pay the rent, which would be nice. So that is Bald Ambition, and it was a great journey. Now, in conjunction with Bald Ambition, 55 episodes, really, I've done 66 episodes of Bald and Bloviating. So while I'm doing the business one, I'm coming to the realization that one of my favorite things to do is talk politics. That's the majority of my video rants on TikTok. I love ranting about the political state of the nation and the world. And I had friends, once again, go with what you know, with who's around you, who's willing to jump on a podcast and just ask them, goad them, coax them. So I did a podcast, little intro, around the same time I started Bald Ambition, and it was Trump declares the end of Palestine. And this coincided with his announcement that he was going to turn Gaza into a bunch of hotels and casinos and turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. And the implications of that, to me, were basically that this guy is serious about kicking the Palestinians the hell out of Gaza, and with that, Israel annexing the West Bank. And I had blogged extensively about this, and Trump coming out and saying it, I was like, wow, what a moment. And a lot has changed since, of course, as we know, but that was a catalyst to start my Bald and Bloviating podcast, which is let's talk politics. Let's talk whatever comes across our mind. And I kind of needed a default position. If I'm going to go with this bald ambition that it's a business podcast, then, and I'm picking topics and I might branch off into different shows, I needed kind of a receptacle to hold all the BS and a general category of stuff. And that became Bald and Bloviating. And the next step was, again, to just reach out to folks. So this one encompassed that kind of bucket of stuff. And I subsequently did podcasts in quick succession with friends on both sides of the political aisle. A Trump supporter, a Kamala Harris supporter, a colleague who got into a debate with me about, me playing devil's advocate with what Trump's strategy might be, just being a contrarian. I started podcasting about the novel that I was working on. So in parallel to the podcasting, I was writing my dream science fiction novel, and I podcasted about that. Then I had a news flash. If this is a general repository of all things Mookie and Bald and Bloviating, I have a ton of short stories and screenplays and op-eds that I've written on Medium that are just sitting there. And I want to practice for my upcoming audiobook of my science fiction novel. I'm exploring audio and media. I love just exercising the muscles in my face as I'm doing now. And this would be a great opportunity to read aloud the stories that have been dormant on these other platforms. And in so doing, maybe even add my own color commentary. Maybe instead of just reading out loud, I'd paraphrase it and talk about it. And that's what I did. So I went back and I dug up old stories that I found great. But again, with limited exposure, how in California in the mid-'80s, I was friends with Beck, the guy who would win the Grammys and become a world famous singer and best friend of David Bowie. We hung out together for several months. What was that like? My association with Andy Dick, really, in Chicago before he moved to Hollywood to strike it big. Let's see. I had op-eds again about American Jewry being split apart by what was going on since October 7th. I talked about my experience as Andrew Yang's consultant for 2 hours, all of 2 hours before his door of his office hit me in the ass on my way out. And then when I published my novel, I wrote annotated commentary of it. And then I got interviewed by my girlfriend who helped edit it a little bit. And the story around that. And she interviewed me. And then I branched out into some of my writing from the 90s. I brought that back to life. And on and on and on. So when you scan through the different episodes of Bald and Bloviating, they zig and zag from some of my older writings to some of the newer ones, things that were on my mind going on in my life, thoughts that I've had, and just an opportunity to set up the soapbox and just rant and rave and read anything that I was interested in. And then bringing folks on with their own rants and raves and readings and opinions. And it's been great. And once again, Bald and Bloviating, 66 episodes last year. This one will be the first episode of season 2. I'm going to flip. And this is the 67th episode. So this was in parallel with the Bald Ambition podcast. So over 110 podcasts. So 2 podcasts a week between these 2 episodes. But the fun didn't stop there. I knew I wanted to do a relationship dating podcast. And part of me felt that there was a side of me that I had to let out here. And I also felt that this had legs in terms of engaging with a wider audience. And rather than plug this into Bald and Bloviating, I knew it wouldn't really fit with the business one if I kept it at that. I created yet another. This one started around the same time. And it began with a story I heard and a piece of advice that came with it from a friend and colleague in New York City. And it's called The Best Relationship Advice Ever, which is the check-in. So once a week, you check in with your partner to share transparently and openly anything that's bugging the hell out of you and on your mind, on the one hand. And I added a twist to it that add everything that you're grateful for. And this periodically and regularly and fairly frequently bubbles up to the surface issues that might be percolating below, not have a chance for expression, and in that stifling and filtering, build up and build up and build up and eventually explode. And then you get a lot of resentment that builds up with couples. So I thought this was the best relationship advice ever. I went on for 8.5 minutes on February 4th and launched this episode. And from there, I was off to the races here too. I covered off on medical aid in dying, where another good friend's mother had a sad passing that was facilitated by medical aid in dying, that she was terminally ill. And instead of going out the long, hard, painful way, she opted to choose when her life would end. And then I brought in another friend and talked about sex positivity, which branched into its own podcast, which I'll cover off in a second. Another friend in Chicago, we talked about being transgendered during Trump 2.0. Very meaningful and interesting and surprising. I brought in my niece who talked about acupuncture. She's a professional acupuncturist. I brought in music fans. I brought in a whole bunch of folks across different aspects of healing, therapy, music as medicine. Here too, I got outreach from PR firms where they sent me folks where their content would be appropriate. A lovely gentleman named Eli Winkler celebrates his inclusion within the Orthodox Jewish community as an LGBTQ participant. Just great examples of folks opening up with this feeling that life could be better, and they're making it better by being champions of their own liberation that they share and they espouse. I brought in my last guest at the end of last year was a guy named Bud, and he has terminal cancer, just to kind of put a bow on the entire season, where I start with medical aid in dying and I ended with a gentleman who's got terminal cancer, maybe only a couple months left, and he wanted to talk about his life. And I did just that in the end of December last year. And along the way, I plugged in readings, audiobook readings from my book, my new science fiction novel. I needed a place for this stuff to live. And I just thought I would plug it into No Hair, All Heart. And I did that maybe because I had segments that were active for Bald Ambition and for Bald and Bloviating, and I just wasn't getting content for No Hair, All Heart at the time. And once I started, I was just off to the races. So there are 96 episodes of No Hair, All Heart. Now, I shit you not, as the phrase goes. 55 for Bald Ambition, 66 for Bald and Bloviating, and 96 episodes since last February of No Hair All Heart, of which a bunch of them are readings from each section of half my science fiction book. I do the author audiobook version. These are the inchoate first draft versions, kind of a warm-up for my audiobook. And these got a lot of listens. I developed a fan base, and people were into it. So this confirmed A, that I'm not crazy. This narrative can hold its own. B, I do a decent job reading to the point people are coming back and listening. And C, I should just do the damn audiobook. So I promised folks that I would read the whole book. And it is amazing that every day, each and every day, I did daily readings of my audiobook. Again, really, I shit you not, from June 29th, and now I'm scanning up the episode list here, just so I could be true to form, to the last section in episode 3 of my book. There are 6 episodes in my science fiction novel on July 29th. So essentially for, let's see, one month, there are 30 episodes from just, again, June 29th through July 29th. Look at that. 1 month cranking an episode a day of my novel. And I got that in here too, alongside other op-eds and other stories that have much of an emotional quality to them. So am I nuts? Do I have too much time in my hands? And the answer is no, I don't have enough. What I have to share is just my bliss in doing this. I think one reason that there's literally, and you can interpret this again as the Amazon flywheel or the blizzard of bullshit, and probably a combination of both, I have been all muzzled and all just wrapped up in being daddy-o and being responsible and living the life of a content consumer. And when it flipped for me into a content creator, and I realized all the writing that I had already done over the course of these years, especially since 2018, and especially since 2022, 2023, with the Super Santa illustrated holiday novel, I just have been going nuts. I have been spending at least 8 hours a day, regardless of whether I need to work 8 hours, creating content. And I've been living the life of an artist. And I've been doing it in a way, and I've observed before in other rants and bloviations on these pods, that for the first time in my life, it's not only flowing like water, like a hurricane with intensity, but I like it. I like myself. I notice that people are perfectionists, that they won't release something until it's reviewed and polished and ruminated over. One reason I believe, at least on the surface, that my creative partnership with the Super Santa illustrator broke down was this guy just felt everything had to be perfect. And conversely, it seemed almost like an excuse that got him off the hook from working every day, because instead of just doing stuff and letting it out there, he would ruminate and have doubts. And I really think people make an excuse for themselves. And I'm not getting myself off the hook, but I'm just incriminating myself that the biggest excuse that people can make, and again, I've got other posts and rants about this, is that it's either not good enough or, I don't have time. How often have you heard, and how often have you said, because I used to say it, well, I could do that, but I just don't have time. Well, you got time to do a bunch of other bullshit, like, sit on your couch and watch Netflix and pace, and think about how people take advantage of you, and perpetuate your story about how life is unfair. And if only people would let you be all you could be that. It takes just this fundamental, gritty belief that if I don't do it, it's never going to get done. And if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So just fucking do it. Just do it. Be like Nike. And I danced around this for decades. And again, I set this rant up, going back a few minutes ago, that I was daddy-o. I was taking care of my kids. I was agency guy. I was living the life. But now I'm like hell's bells. And as I go through my output from last year, and I understand this is kind of solipsistic and even narcissistic, I'm just ranting about my own bullshit here. But okay, I'm not putting a gun to your head to listen. And frankly, I don't really give a shit who is listening, because I have to get this out. Last year, between Bald Ambition, Bald and Bloviating, and No Hair All Heart, you've got 55, 66, and 96 podcasts that vary in length from, let's say, a 15, 20-minute episode read aloud from my science fiction novel to a 3-hour conversation about politics, art, culture, what have you. And that's not the end of my podcasting. And it's also not the end of my creative output, because while I'm doing all this, I've got 2, 3, 4, 5 videos I'm posting. And I wrote the science fiction novel of my dreams, which is a whole separate thing. Now, how have I been doing with my business? Well, no, I didn't buy crypto like my anti-hero in my science fiction book back in 2011. And yeah, I'm financially not necessarily in a place where I would love to be. And in fact, I've ranted about this too, that my fairly irresponsible and dire financial condition, which has basically been engendered by this manic output of content, actually put some fire under my ass. But all that aside, I have also been working. So has it been the full 40, 50, 60-hour week, which is what I used to do? No. But I've still been working too, amid all of this. So does this translate into workaholic? Yeah, sure, but I've never felt this creative. I've never felt this productive. I've never felt this happy. So I must be doing something right. And I look at all this stuff and I'm like, bravo, what do I do with it? Well, I threw it all on Substack, and for a while it was all a big mess there too. And I'll go into that in a little bit, how about toward the end of this year, I came to the realization I got to button some of this shit up. I need to really create my own brand. But that's its own story. So just in summary, these 3 podcast shows, Bald Ambition, Bald and Bloviating, and No Hair All Heart, had just a ton of content, the Flywheel and the bullshit. But the fun doesn't stop there. Now, after I published the book of my dreams, Johnny Fazuli and the Transfinite Reality Engine, kind of Roald Dahl, James and the Giant Peach, get it? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. But it goes way beyond that. But suffice to say, book of my dreams. When I was 11 years old, 12 years old, I wrote my first short story, much like Mammoth, with his manual typewriter and a coffee. And it was about the multiverse. And it ended with an infinite number of Michael Spitz's writing an infinite number of stories on an infinite number of typewriters. The natural consequence of believing in an infinite universe where every possibility played itself out, not once, but necessarily an infinite number of times, because it's infinite. It's been a lingering obsession for me to write a book about this. And I've had fits and starts, and I wrote the seed of that novel concept as a short story during the pandemic in January of 2021. And this year, it finally erupted into its own novel, and it's exceeded my expectations. So we're looking at June. Around my birthday, I publish my dream novel. I get it out there. And it's a friends and family kind of release. People were nice to me. They want to do me a favor. They buy it. They leave a review. And it doesn't go too much beyond that. I enter the blizzard of bullshit on Amazon, which is 100,000 titles published every year. And unless you've got a huge paid media campaign or a huge entrenched following, you're going to remain flying under the radar. So as we rolled through the summer, and I connected with Ingrid Moon, as I mentioned. I had her on the podcast for Bald Ambition. And then I thought, you know what? I need to, if I'm a science fiction writer, I need to make connection to the community. And I know it's back-ass words, and it sounds opportunistic, and in ways it is. But I'm the kind of writer who doesn't really need community and reinforcement. I'm just in my room banging away, feeling good about it. And I've had this need since I was 11 fucking years old to do it. So I did it. And I've since met other writers in that same kind of boat. But voila, I have created a Mookie multiverse media empire, despite myself, in spite of myself, and to spite myself, as Johnny Fazuli, my anti-hero, might say. I know how to podcast. I don't necessarily know or am adept at blasting my podcasts, which I will, just to repeat again, explore in this year. But I know how to do this. I got the app down. I've since mastered video. So I post on YouTube the video interviews. And I'm good at this, and I love doing it. So in October, I launched the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory. I did a 2-minute opening. I created my own seed content, which is the top 10 reasons we love science fiction, and I ranted for an hour and a half, as I'm ranting now, about science fiction. And then I brought in people I know, people introduced to me by Ingrid. I repurposed prior podcasts with Ingrid on this channel. And I've got Greg Sorber, who writes the Meghaven series. I brought in folks where I actually made public service announcements on the forums and platforms and Facebook pages. And I brought in the author of Diamond Dragons, who responded to my outreach. I've got Nathan J. Pierce, who just launched his own indie science fiction novel, Faith Faraday. I met a lovely couple, Blake and Sherry Shimshock, who do collaboration as a couple, writing their Derek Fade science fiction series. A former colleague's art director is a science fiction novelist, Lou Iovino. A PR company reached out to me finally in November. It took me less than a month, and I'm on the radar, at least of the bots. And a young writer, Robert Reif, debuts his Frontier One with me. And then I talked to a buddy of mine who's a PhD in physics to talk science fiction. Another guy I met, another writer, Jay-Z Pitts, on Substack. I bring in another friend to talk science fiction, a Cornish poet in my Monday morning writers group that my sister has invited me to, offered to do some readings from my science fiction novel. And most recently, just at the end of this year, I brought in Don Ellis Aguilio, whom I met at LA Comic-Con, who does the Superman Aquaman comic books and has his own Rise series and is working on his own horror series for this year. So all of a sudden, I'm a science fiction and fantasy podcaster out of expedience as a natural effect of being a podcaster. And the bottom line, all opportunism aside, I love doing this. I love interviewing people. It's not even interviewing people, it's talking to people. And it creates content. I love every aspect of the process. And I could say, why the hell didn't I do this earlier? Which my nephew, Juan, suggested to me when he came to visit California with the family. We're walking down Laguna Beach, and just matter of factly, he's like, this is great, but, aren't you kind of late to the party? And the answer is, of course, but you do what you do when you do it. And I've mentioned at least my excuses why I haven't, and who really cares? I've got friends who have been institutionalized for the holidays, sadly. One of our good friends from high school and even elementary school, he's in a psych ward this holiday season. And I've got other colleagues who have committed suicide. I know other people who have passed away from cancer. And as you get older, as Louis C.K. has observed, you start to notice people dropping, and it gets real. And, when you're 30, you're walking up the street, and then in the distance, you see someone fall off a cliff, and you're like, wow, that's too bad. And then as you get older, they're a lot closer and more frequent, and you're like, holy shit. So I am blessed. I am expressing gratitude, and I am so thankful that I'm doing this crazy shit now. I'm not going to sit here and regret not doing this crazy shit earlier. Sure, it would be nice if I had, more money to do it, but that's on me. And that's putting some interesting pressure on me to learn new skills. Just as the guru kind of gave me some mojo maybe to branch out into different modalities, my own impoverished state and debt is imploring me to explore ways to take seriously my audience, which up to now I really haven't. And as evinced by this rant, if you've even made it this far, clearly I'm just unloading. I tend to think that what I'm unloading about is kind of interesting, but that's for you to decide if you're even here, and frankly, that's not at the top of my concern. I've made the observation, and I joke around, that I have a 1 terabyte goal for content uploads every month. That's 1,000 gigs of content that I upload every month. Video, podcasts, the works. That sounds absurd, but I think other content creators can kind of relate to it, which is just keep cranking. What is a personal brand? How do you identify yourself? How do you differentiate? What are your own characteristics? Well, it's not something that you just put out there anymore. Old school was, Coke's the real thing, and FedEx absolutely positively has to get there overnight. And you spend months, if not years, and millions of dollars of creativity and research to double, triple check that it works. And then you take a bit of a risk and you launch it. You see if it sticks, and then it's there. That's your brand. That's what you do. But digital isn't like that, and life isn't like that. You show up not to just present yourself, but to recreate yourself, evolve yourself, engage with your audience. Maybe I haven't done that great a job of engaging with my audience. I engage with my guests. I engage with my own creative self. And I thought about this just the other day. We have this idle time between Christmas, the Christmas holiday, and New Year's. December 24th until January 1st today is the dead zone for business. And just like idle Sundays are a nightmare for workaholics because they're not busy doing something, it's been a little bit difficult for me. I've tried not to create, and I haven't really. I did take a bit of a break. And in that vacuum, I get my own anxiety, my own feeling of FOMO, where I should be bloviating and releasing content, especially since I picked it up as such a habit. But it's also been an opportunity to self-reflect, and that's the whole point of the taking a break. And out of that break, I've come to the realization too that I need to up my game, as I'm mentioning, in terms of paid advertising and in terms of making my videos on TikTok and social media and even my podcast more interesting. Do some introductory animation, put titles for the participants, do video and image overlays as we're talking, make them more of an experience, get them more polished. That's coming out of this too. And it circles right back to this idea of putting more energy and work into it, take it a little bit more seriously. And it's engendered by this financial desperation of building up an insane amount of debt, being fiscally irresponsible, living sometimes week to week in this situation, and yet never being happier and more motivated than ever before. So there you go. And I can't close this out, at least talking about my podcast, without mentioning the next podcast show that I have created. Yes, I, again, shit you not, 5 separate podcast shows, all hosted by Mookie Spitz. And this is Ink vs. Algorithm, which I created with the feeling that the science fiction and fantasy community cares only about science fiction and fantasy. And I am a writer, and I want to do other types of writing still. And I had a few friends that I met through the group. Julianne Webb is working on her memoir. And I had, frankly, one of the most popular in terms of friends and family viewerships, when for 3 hours this November, early November, we chatted about her work, and writing in 2025. Ink versus algorithm. What's it like writing in this age of AI as one focus? And then I got introduced to T.H. Forrest, who does male-to-male romance. She's a cis female who writes about gay men. That was very, very interesting. And then a former colleague and friend, Hudson Plum, was just publishing his poetry. And we revisited the work of another podcast guest and friend and colleague, Ali Rizvi, 10 years after he wrote The Atheist Muslim. Mark Oldroyd in England published his first historical novel, and he was a huge fan of Super Santa, and I wanted to just reciprocate his early enthusiasm. He put me on his podcast, and then he did a review of Super Santa on his podcast review show. And then Bert Biscoe, who's a Cornish legend in terms of poetics and governing, and he's just that poet, and he knows it, in Cornwall, England. And I had him on, and he read a section from my book, and it might make it to the audio book as its own thing. So I have had a blast with 5 podcast shows. And between Science Fiction Fantasy Factory, I've got 19 episodes, and Ink vs. Algorithm 7. And once again, just going back to this Amazon flywheel versus the blizzard of bullshit, I've had 244 podcasts, many of them in video format, with dozens and dozens of guests across 5 key categories in 11 months. Really, really. And I feel like I'm just getting started. And I love it. And I appreciate you for listening and watching. And I just can't get over what a good time this is. And no, I don't think I should have started earlier just because I didn't. And who knows, a meteorite can hit my room here in Lake Forest, California, and I'll be over tomorrow. But it's been great, and I plan on doing even more of it. And that's just the podcasts. As we roll into 2026, in addition to exploring advertising and video editing, I want to finish the audiobook of Johnny Fazuli. That's at the top of my list. I'm going to the Pasadena Comic Con January 25th. I'll be there with Ingrid and some of the podcast guests. Greg Sorber, Blake and Sherry Shimshock. We're all going to be there. We're going to do a follow-up podcast to talk about our experiences and share best practices. I have an idea for a men's book on sexuality. Yes, really, really. This fits the multiverse theme where there isn't anything under the sun that I don't have my opinion about. It makes my brand identity fairly challenging, but I'll get to that in a second. Anyway, I'm thinking of calling it, and I've got the draft ready, and I'm polishing, and I'm working on it, and I'm trying to get it out expeditiously. I'm going to put paid advertising behind it. I'm going to create a mailing list. Unleash Your Miracle D. 21 days to sexual mastery and multi-orgasmic control. Now, that sounds about as left field as it can get, at least with that level of specificity and focus. But this goes back to a blog post I did during the pandemic. In addition to the Johnny Fazuli Seed episode, I wrote Mastering the Male Orgasm, a step-by-step guide for couples, which has consistently garnered attention, copycats, readers on Medium, the blogging platform, since I wrote it. Of all my 440 blogs, that one has proven to be consistently the most popular. So that tells me something. That tells me that there's some interest in this. Again, I see some copycats on the platform and presumably online. I really didn't do an exhaustive search. I honestly don't care that much. I mean, don't rip me off. It'll happen anyway. Whatever. Hey. But my point, though, here is adapting it into book format and publishing it on Amazon. If friends and family and a few randos are the only ones so far who've shown proactive interest in Johnny Fazuli, that's not going to pay the rent. And if I have any hope of really converting this insane production and passion into a monetizable later life career, then experimenting must continue. And the metrics are there for the male multiple orgasm and this idea of male sexual control. So why not? So I will keep you posted on that. And as I mentioned, I want to do it legit. I want to create a mailing list for it. I'll put paid advertising behind it. What I've learned from my fellow authors on Inkverse Algorithm and the Science Fiction and Fantasy Factory, by the way, is the best practice of paying for ads for what is a targeted and targetable book and pumping it up. You put in $1,000 and you might get $1,000 worth of sales. And even if you just break even, you're getting sales. Amazon, Flywheel. And this is a great way to put a bow on it, which is the difference between a blizzard of bullshit and the Amazon Flywheel is it sticks. You can break even and maybe even lose a little money, pay to play, but you're paying, you're playing, and you're in play. That's a big difference from flying under the radar and basically being that tree in a forest that falls and no one's around. Did the tree fall? Yeah, I believe in objective reality, even with quantum mechanics. I think they'll figure that out. Next Nobel Prize. But do you want to be that tree that nobody sees or hears, even if you break even if you lose a little money, you're better off being the Amazon flywheel than a blizzard of bullshit. And up to now, being obsessed by creativity for, I think, three years is about right, where I have been a practicing artist. I've been like Picasso, at least in terms of output. There isn't a day where I'm not creating content and distributing it. Sometimes most of my day is consumed with thinking about content, creating content, distributing content. And thanks to this epiphany and this quantum leap that I took only about a year ago, I have branched out from just click, click, clacking and knocking over my coffee to video and audio and TikTok and social media to podcasting and the like, and even book fairs, which I went to and will go to again. Now, I have no idea where this is heading. I could be the proverbial fart in church, but that's okay. And that's both my bane and my boon. It's the bane in that with, frankly, more concerted effort and focus and giving a shit about an audience and gearing content to placate them, I suffer from remaining this blizzard of bullshit. But I benefit from being a gleeful, blissed out bullshit blizzard engine. It's so much fun. And a big part of that is because for decades I didn't like my stuff. And for decades it was arduous. I remember agonizing over sentences, looking at the screen, trying to get out a blog post. And now I'm just cranking it out. And I can't shut the hell up. Do I need an editor? Do I need a production team? Do I need an agent? Yeah, I guess so. But it's lonely at the top, but it ain't crowded. And conversely, it's super fun, if lonely, at the bottom. I don't need to appease anybody. Nothing and nobody is holding me back. And that in and of itself is unbelievably liberating, especially early on in a career. I'm sharing my stuff at this Monday morning writers group. I was invited by my sister. She was part of she's a writer. She's published, I think, like over a dozen books. So this scourge, this madness is in our DNA. She didn't want to have me join because she thought I'd be rude and over the top and bombastic. And actually, I'm pretty loud and opinionated, but I'm tactful. I told her, come on, I've survived in the Madison Avenue agency world for almost 2 decades, so I do have some tact. Colleagues might disagree, and I've been known to go supernova and flare out. But I could chew with my mouth closed when necessary, and I more or less have been. But I've been sharing content since I've joined them, and it's effortless to either create content on the fly or just go in this vast trove of stuff. I mean, go visit my stuff on Substack. It's Substack Mookie Spitz. It's the Mookie multiverse. And I've got rants and essays and stories and technology and Fazuli and podcasts. I've got over 800 pieces of content on my Substack page or website. And that's not all of it. And I'm really just getting started. So should I be doing better than I am? Just based on all of this? Well, once again, I'm going to bring it up. I hate to be redundant. Flywheel versus blizzard. It's been a blizzard of bullshit, and it's been great. And if I can convert it to the Amazon flywheel, more power to me. But I'll do it when I do it. It'll happen when it happens. And that feels good. This brings me full circle, at least for now, to my branding strategy, or a lack thereof, as folks sometimes say or used to. Should I have done a single Mookie Spitz show containing all of these podcasts, so 244 episodes of the Mookie Spitz show this year, wrapping everything all into a single wrapper with its search engine optimization, with its opportunities for advertising, with all that good stuff. One saturated fire hose blizzard of bullshit. Would that have maybe flipped me into the realm of the flywheel? Or did I do it smart, which is doing separate shows for separate audiences? Jury's still out, to be frank. On the plus side of the latter approach, people who are into science fiction and fantasy don't care about the other topics per se. So if they follow me, let alone scroll through my podcast episode list, they might lose interest or get lost or try to figure out what the hell's the point. And conversely, if they've got the science fiction fantasy factory, then it all makes sense instantly. And I could target that, and I can put paid advertising behind it, and it's for that audience. But who really follows Mookie Spitz? And if I do get folks beyond friends and family, then usually they're searching, they want a particular subject, and they kind of find me ad hoc, at least for now. But with that spirit of zero regrets and infinite forward momentum, I got the 5 shows. I'll probably keep adding shows. And look what Amazon did. In a traditional branding strategy approach, Amazon doesn't make any sense either. They're the everything store. How can you sell everything and be known for that? Well, Bezos himself called it Amazon because the Amazon rainforest, the river that runs through it, is one of the largest naturally occurring objects to be seen from outer space. It's big. It's one of the biggest, if not the biggest things on the planet. And he wanted the biggest company on earth. And look, voila, he more or less succeeded. So think big, be aspirational, lose, 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 lose until you win. So everything's underneath that umbrella to the point where Amazon Prime streaming content, you could watch your favorite movie on the same service provided by the same company that you order your toilet paper from. Again, in traditional branding circles or strategies, that just doesn't make sense. You go to In-N-Out Burger here in California to get burgers and shakes and fries. They don't sell shrimp, cocktail. You don't get steaks. You get your In-N-Out Burger, and it's a smashing success based on its raw simplicity. But then 100 yards away, you go to the mom and pop diner and you've got an encyclopedia of a menu. And is the diner doing as well as In-Out Burger? And is the brand as established? No. But go to Denny's, go to California Pizza Kitchen. I don't know. What the hell really works? I just know that I'm having fun, and doing it this way compartmentalizes all of my bloviation in a way that I can even handle it, and I can wrap my head around it, and I could kind of compartmentalize. Now, what I've done on Substack, the other platform, which ostensibly is a glorified mailing list, with some backup content. So you get subscribers and then you publish and they receive an email, and then you put some content that's public domain for anybody and other content that they ostensibly have to pay for. Now, some people have made their living off of Substack. They do really, really well, but they usually come to Substack with thousands of followers they've already garnered elsewhere. And they're willing to pay for content because they love that person and they're all in it to win it. But if you're coming from left field on the one hand, and on the other, you're a multiverse of bullshit blizzarding. My essential challenge is also my differentiator and opportunity. I have yet to see anyone on Substack or most platforms and places who do all the different types of content that I'm doing. And I'm not blowing smoke up my own ass. I'm merely making a statement based on my own experience, which is reinforced by reaching out to some of my fellow artists and asking them, for example, to be on a podcast. And I've had surprising responses, which is like, no, I'm not comfortable doing that. It's out of my comfort zone to be on a podcast, let alone be on video. And you have a lot of writers who are just comfortable being behind their keyboard. They never want to be seen. You have other folks who are good on camera who just don't write. And you hardly have anyone who writes essays and screenplays and short stories and rants on video and does podcasts and publishes books and does it with this kind of volume. So from that kind of branding differentiation point of view, the multiverse motif works for me. I'm a Mookie multiverse of essays, short stories, video logs and rants, books. But people don't know me really, and they don't quite get it. And I could do my best to try to differentiate, but I'm missing the critical mass, which will turn the blizzard of bullshit into the flywheel. And what I've done to put a capper on this section and a capper on this whole podcast, at least for now, is organize my content a little bit better on Substack. So before it was just kind of a chaotic magazine of all this different stuff. So I spent a little time and I reorganized things into compartments that are coherent. So you've got the big opening headline of the latest thing I've posted, regardless of its type. And then I've got a section on podcasts, and I've got a section on essays, and a section on stories and technology and my book. So it looks like a digital magazine. It's coherent. It makes sense. And I have an about me section, and I post on Notes, which is more or less the news feed of Substack. And it's kind of cool, actually. But once again, it's that tree falling in that forest where I need to build growth. And I think my content is good and it's diverse. And the diversity itself is its differentiating factor. But here's where it self-destructs a little bit. People tend to be known for that one thing. You are a science fiction author of novels. You are a video ranter. You write op-eds with a political bent. But who does all of this? And I think I do it with a certain measure of competence, too. So I think going back to what I was hinting at before for rolling into 2026, I think it behooves me to explore paid advertising and do it judiciously and work on my video content as kind of a hook to see if I can add visuals and some stuff to get a few more eyeballs and just keep going, persisting. It's arithmetic growth, not geometric. And I don't think I could do too much different than I'm doing, because in ways, some of the things I'm doing is off the charts, and other things are just bad. And that's reflective of my life, which is I suck at financial responsibility. I suck at cleaning my apartment and paying attention to what's in front of my face. But I could literally hold a 130,000 novel in my head at the same time and just swim through it in a way where I can make it so cohesive that people who don't know better don't bother to notice or care. And I don't think that that's necessarily a strength, but I can do it. And if you can do it, then why wouldn't you? And I'm not saying I'm a fucking genius. I'm just saying I have my own style. And I'm convinced that there's a style for everyone, and there's a style of writing for everyone, and a style of reading for everyone. And the one place where you betray yourself and ultimately your audience is to cater to forces outside yourself in ways that make you disingenuous. So one thing is for sure moving forward into 2026, which is I'm going to make a resolution about not making resolutions, which is I am happy and I feel good doing what I'm doing. So whether I have 1 million new followers or 10 or none, or whether I lose a few, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because I've never been happier doing what I'm doing. I've never felt better about what I'm getting done. And the simple act of the doing fills me with that joy. And I don't know, man. What else can you really want? If it sticks, it sticks. And if it doesn't, then I had a good time blowing my blizzard, whether or not the flywheel catches. So thank you for listening. This is actually the first episode of Bald and Bloviating, as we are now on January 1st. Season 2 begins in this fitting kind of way. We'll see what's in store, and I will keep you posted. And I'm always eager for feedback. Hear your comments, what you think. And as I grow my audience, which is inevitable, even if arithmetic, if not exponential, I listen. I take in feedback. People have commented on my videos on TikTok that I talk too slowly, so I speed them up. People have observed that they're too long, so I am more succinct. And when the feedback is good, where I think that the reviewer understands the content, I listen and I will change. And yes, I'm a stubborn blizzard of bullshit bloviator, but I also have sensitivities to the Amazon flywheel. And it took Bezos some time. I'm no Bezos and this is no Amazon. But this takes me some time too. And one thing is for sure, in addition to being blissed out amid my blizzard, that I am learning. And there's no bigger satisfaction, no greater joy than to learn something new and tinker and evolve each and every day.